Hello, everybody. I'm Dr. Hepsharat Amadi, and I'm here to tell you a little bit about long COVID. Long COVID is something that we became aware of only a little bit later on in the pandemic. COVID has been evolving and showing us lots of different things over the 2+ years that it's been out there. And so at first we didn't know about it, of course, because there weren't enough people who had it to really be able to tell how most people did with it. But there has been a group of people who has had symptoms of COVID for over 4 weeks from the time that they were infected. And these are the people who are said to have long COVID. And it's very interesting because different demographics do differently with COVID. In terms of severe illness, it's more likely that men might have severe COVID course than women. But in terms of those people who get long COVID, it's more likely to be women. And that's why I think that there should really be a lot more gender-based research about this, because it's clear that different genders respond in different ways as a generalization to getting COVID. But in any case, long COVID has been kind of mysterious for Western medicine. There are many people who have long COVID, and it's estimated that somewhere between 1 in 3 and 1 in 5 patients who gets COVID will get long COVID. So obviously this is going to be a huge number of people going down in the future who have long COVID. And Western medicine doesn't really know a good way to manage this situation. It seems to be mysterious to them, and they are looking for some pharmaceutical that is going to cure this, but I think it's relatively unlikely that they will find one, because I think that there's a number of factors that contribute to whether a person develops long COVID or not, and some of these factors are things that are not typically measured in Western medicine. So I have a theory, and so far that's been borne out by the only 2 patients that I've seen who have long COVID, but I have a theory that says that a lot of the reason why people might have either a more severe course of COVID when they do get it, or might be subject to long COVID, may relate to hormonal imbalances or deficiencies. So in Western medicine, hormones are not things that they measure routinely. So usually in Western medicine, they're pretty unaware of what the hormonal status of the patient is. They don't measure it routinely, and when they do measure it, they don't measure it very comprehensively. So I have theorized that probably one of the major reasons why people who get long COVID is because they are deficient in certain hormones, most notably probably cortisol. So cortisol, in case you're wondering, is a hormone that's produced by the adrenal glands. And the adrenal glands sit on top of the kidneys, and they make a number of very important hormones. One of the most well-known of the hormones that the adrenal glands make is adrenaline. And so, but cortisol is another very important hormone that the adrenal glands make, and most people can go through an entire lifetime in the United States seeing their doctors regularly and never, ever have their cortisol levels checked. Or if on the extremely rare occasions when they might, they will only be checked in blood, which is not really an adequate way of looking at them, because cortisol levels are supposed to be very different at different times of day. I'm going to show you a saliva test here that, let's see if you can see it, I hope you can, that I do with some of my patients. You can see this gray shaded area in here. This is the normal curve of cortisol secretion. So it's supposed to be highest in the morning when people first wake up and get out of bed so that they can do what they need to do. And it's supposed to be lowest late at night so that they can wind down and relax and go to sleep. Um, if the person's cortisol levels are inadequate, and by the way, we've heard a lot probably in this country about people having too much cortisol because there have been commercials warning that if you have too much cortisol, you're likely to accumulate belly fat. Well, that may be true in the short run, but nature likes a balance. It doesn't like too much, but it also doesn't like too little. And too little in the long run can be even worse than too much, because too little cortisol will not enable the immune system to be supported properly, and therefore it will allow the presence of germs that it would normally be strong enough to kick out. Not only that, but too little cortisol also causes, all other things being equal, much more inflammation than there would be if the person had normal levels of cortisol. So what are some of the symptoms of long COVID? Fatigue, brain fog, difficulty focusing, difficulty with memory, many different things, a lot of which are neurological. And deficiency of cortisol can cause inflammation of the nerves. So this is another reason why I think that probably it's going to be a long time before Western medicine, solves the mystery of long COVID, because I believe that one of the factors that causes this is something that, again, Western medicine doesn't typically measure. I believe that there's other factors too that may be involved in whether a person gets long COVID or not, besides the person's gender. These may be factors related to lack of circulation. Circulation is very important in defending the body from pathogens, because if the person's antibodies or their T cells can't get to the germs, then it doesn't really matter so much if the body's making it, if it can't get to where it needs to go. So circulation is very important, and oftentimes people are sedentary. They may not exercise. They may have presence of toxins in their body, and toxins can also inhibit circulation, because toxins will cause oxidative stress, and then the oxidative stress will cause the laying down of fibrin in the blood vessels, the tiny little blood vessels, and it winds up blocking them up. So, lack of circulation is also an issue. And it may be also that lack of certain nutrients may also be very important in who gets long COVID and who doesn't. So like, for example, as an example of a nutrient that I think is very important in general and also very important with regards to COVID and circulation is fish oils. So fish oils, or essential fatty acids like EPA and DHA, these are things that help to repair the nerves. There's a myelin sheath on the outside of the nerves, kind of like the plastic coating on the outside of wires that prevents them from shorting out when they come into contact with each other. This is kind of insulation. And so when the body doesn't have enough of the raw materials it needs to repair the nerves, namely when it doesn't have enough of the essential fatty acids that go to form the myelin sheath of the nerves, then that can cause inflammation, short-circuiting, lack of proper nerve function. So I recommend that people take at least 2,000 milligrams of essential fatty acids per day. If you took them in the form of a 500 milligram capsule, then that would mean you would be taking 4 capsules a day, which is more than it usually says to take on the label of the bottles, but it's really what people need, not only to help them not have long COVID and also to help their brain function, period. It's very important, for example, with people who have ADD, that they get enough essential fatty acids. And it's also very helpful in preventing abnormal blood clots. There's practically nobody that I've ever heard that has had a heart attack or a stroke while they've been taking at least 2,000 milligrams of essential fatty acids per day. So this is something that is also typically not assessed in Western medicine. Western medicine is not really very good at assessing nutritional status. And oftentimes they don't do any tests at all to find out whether the person is having adequate essential fatty acid intake. So are there other nutrients that are important with regard to COVID? Yes, certainly there are. Zinc is very important. I think the right probiotics are also very important because there's a really strong gut-lung connection here and gut-brain connection here. And so if the person has the right probiotics in their gut, that can often help them. And also there may be issues with regard to toxicity. And toxicity is another area that Western medicine just doesn't assess. So you could go your whole life to your regular primary care doctor and they would never do any test to see what kinds of toxins that you've absorbed, what kinds of heavy metals, what kinds of pollutants. And we know that people who live in industrial areas where there's a lot of chemical pollution and or a lot of environmental pollution oftentimes have worse courses of COVID, more severe symptoms, oftentimes landing them in the hospital or possibly even killing them. And yet, Western medicine doesn't typically assess what a person's toxin loads are like. So, again, just to recap, I think that hormone balance and hormone levels are probably very important in terms of who gets long COVID or not. And one of the things we've also seen with COVID is that oftentimes older people do less well. And one of the things that tends to happen as we get older is we make less hormones. And so I believe that bioidentical hormone therapy, if it's done correctly, taking into account the adrenal and the thyroid situation, as well as the male and female hormones, can be extremely useful and protective in not only helping to prevent a person from having severe COVID acutely, but also very important in preventing them from developing long COVID. Okay, so that's my take on long COVID. I hope that it was useful to